You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 441 of the podcast. And in this one, I got on Madina Alam. Madina is a licensed mental health therapist and director of therapist engagement at NOCD. We discuss her therapy journey, ERP as a tool for life, explaining exposure and response prevention therapy, working for NOCD, coming up with exposure ideas in session, homework, when ERP works really well, what she notices, experiences of being on the TV show The Bachelor and dealing with the pressure of it, and much more. And thank you to NOCD for supporting the podcast. NOCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NOCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Madina for her time. It was really great chatting with her and hearing her thoughts on ERP and OCD. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening. As always, it means a lot. And without further ado, here is Madina. Welcome to the podcast, Madina.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And as you know, I'd love to hear your therapy journey, like what got you into being a therapist and then why OCD?
Yeah, I have like a very, I think, non-conventional like journey. So last minute before I went to grad school, I was actually going to become a lawyer. And I switched to mental health counseling. And to this day, I honestly don't really know why. Like people ask me this question all the time. But whatever, I went obviously to go on and to get my degree. I do think like a big part of why I like being a therapist is I like to understand and I like to help, obviously, right? That's such a cliche reason we get into therapy. But I think my decision, my last minute switch is important because I think part of why I like the path I've chosen as far as like OCD and ERP is it's a little bit more like direct and hands-on than like traditional therapy. And so I actually got recruited by NOCD. They had found my psychology profile today through my practice. And when I had listened to the recruiter on the phone about like the type of therapy, I was like so interested. So more background, I was a yoga teacher for about a year. And a lot of the constructs of like yoga and like what we learn in yoga teacher training is very similar to exposure response prevention. So this idea of like leaning into discomfort and the importance of uncertainty and like, so everything that like ERP offered was like so in alignment with like how I truly like personally led my life. And so that's really what kind of like landed me here and what has kept me, treating OCD and anxiety.
Yeah. Wow, brilliant. And I remember your yoga videos or posts you used to do on your Instagram. So yeah. And yeah, there are a lot of similarities. And I guess just before we started recording, we were talking about, well, I kind of jotted it down as like the philosophy of ERP, but more for you seeing ERP as not just something for OCD, as a message you want to push across. So just, anything you want to say on that?
I feel like 99% of issues for any of us, whether we're in therapy, we're not, we have an issue or whatever, is that we're trying to get rid of something that's uncomfortable. And I think like one of life's best lessons is creating a different relationship with discomfort. And that is truly why, like, obviously I mainly treat anxiety and OCD, but like, I talk about this with like random people, like, cause I know it relates. Right. And like I said, I kind of use it in my own life. And I think that's part of what makes it successful is because I truly believe it.
Yeah, true. And it's ERP is obviously a scientific or therapeutic approach, scientifically backed, but the core tenets of ERP, of effectively facing one's fears, is something we've done for thousands and thousands of years. And Stoicism talked about it 2000 plus years ago, whatever it was. So it's kind of in our DNA to face fears, and I think also it's in our DNA to avoid and run from pain and discomfort. And
Yeah.
ERP maybe gives us that way of that tool to face those fears again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like if we could, now that we're talking a little bit more, sorry, this is like, you asked me this like 5 minutes ago, but I do really love it in the, like with respect of the end goal being like improved confidence. And like,
Mm,
that's something again, like I work on it even kind of relates to the show. It relates, I did bodybuilding for years. I was an athlete. Like
mm,
I, do a lot of speaking engagements, and it's like, as people, I think like there's so many of us who want to work on our confidence, and like that is through doing scary things.
mm.
Think of like people who have anxiety. It's like they're constantly doubting everything.
Yeah.
We could like gear it that way too if you want.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Absolutely. Um, so I guess let's think about ERP for OCD, but obviously you can talk about it in any way. Because obviously whether it's ERP for OCD or ERP for social anxiety, the core or key experience is the same, right? We're just
Mhm.
tailoring it slightly. So when setting up ERP with a client, they've just joined OCD, they're seeing you obviously for ERP, how are you talking about it? Like what, because every therapist will describe it slightly differently. How are you sort of setting up ERP and why we're doing it and what it's going to look like?
Yeah, I think like, obviously before setting up ERP, I'm always super clear on like what exactly OCD is. I think sometimes we like throw around these terms to our clients or even the general population, right? We know that that's thrown around so much.
Yeah.
So really normalizing the symptoms and normalizing that, for example, everyone has intrusive thoughts. We all know this. Well, we don't all know this, right? Actually,
Yeah.
I think a lot of us in the field know this.
Mhm.
And so normalizing the diagnosis, and then also normalizing ERP, because a lot of times we think like, oh, I have to do this the rest of my life. So I always like to like let them know that it is truly a way of living. I might do a little self-disclosure on that front so it doesn't feel like such a daunting task. But like the constructs of exposure response prevention are quite simple, right? We're re-exposing
Mhm.
you to something that's scary. We're essentially re-triggering you, and we're helping you choose not to do your compulsion or your typical response.
Mhm.
So I try to like make it very like layman's terms as best as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the word choose there on compulsions
Mhm.
because it often doesn't feel like a choice, right? But it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like such a big thing that I say very early on in treatment. I always say like, I'm going to say this with the most love and compassion because I want to encourage you to know that you can choose, that you don't
Mhm.
have to do something in alignment with what anxiety or fear wants you to do. I'll say, like, like, I know you don't want to sit on the couch and ruminate. I know you don't want to avoid driving. Those aren't things you want to do, right? And so you
Mhm.
do have the choice to say, like, I am actually going to get in the car, or I am actually going to hold my baby, or I am going to get up and, do this,
Mhm.
that, and the fourth.
That's true. Yeah, good point. And obviously, as the therapist, it's helping them learn they do have that resilience and bravery and can face those things and resist the compulsion.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So with I'm always interested with the hierarchy or exposure list or whatever we want to call it, or exposure ideas. How are you in session? Work with them on coming up with those ideas? Like, is there any creative ways you do it? Is it just getting them to sort of, free associate or, yeah, just however you do it? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I always give homework as far as like them tracking their triggers in between session, just because we're as humans we're not the best like historians. So
Mm,
going based off memory, I'm not a huge fan of. I think too, just like with years of experience, I'm acting like I'm like 90, but like after you've been treating OCD for a little bit, you
mm,
kind of understand like when someone says I fear this, that there's going to be other things that they inherently fear that they might not even know, right? Like someone who
yeah.
has just right themes, like I'm almost willing to bet that like pulling up one of their pant legs and keeping the other one down is going to bug them, right? But they're not going to say,
Mm,
"Hey, Madina, like that bugs me." And I
mm,
would even go as far to say that would bug a lot of us, right? And to
yeah.
normalize. But getting creative with them by using the sheet that they fill out, but also just asking
Mm,
them. I think because I there was a period where I was training like clinicians who were new to OCD, and it's like don't put so much pressure on yourself to come up with all of the ideas. Like half the time I'm asking my client, like, what do you think would be triggering? What are you willing to do today? And then I think it also empowers them and makes them feel like more kind of in control of the treatment. So using the actual client and then using that monitoring sheet.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. And do you add as you go? Like if they come
Yeah.
in, I've had another idea and yeah.
Yeah, I always tell them that the hierarchy or the treatment plan is like not like exhaustive. Like I don't want them to think like those are the things I'm doing
Yeah.
because like again, ERP is like a way of living. And
Mhm.
so this is just like a reference point. But there's an opportunity to lean into discomfort most moments of the day,
Yeah.
OCD or not. And
Yeah.
so I always remind them exposure is doing the scary thing, not doing the thing you're used to doing, the compulsion. Um, Exposure is living life despite
Mhm.
uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's not so
Yeah.
ordered in a box.
Yeah.
Especially if
Yeah.
someone has just right OCD, then they're going to start
That's
doing it
true.
in just the right way. They're like, I did this, this, this.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, good point. And I've got more questions on ERP, but before that, just thinking about, when you work with NOCD, so obviously it's solely teletherapy. Um, Before you joined OCD, were you working in person or were you doing teletherapy as well?
No, actually, I got my job with NOCD, I think like 3 days before the shutdown of COVID.
Ah,
So
okay.
it's very perfect timing. So no, I was all in person and I wasn't specialized at that point.
Mhm.
Which I have so many thoughts on that in general. I don't know if you want to go down that path, but no, I wasn't. I was in person.
Okay, yeah. And I get you were doing different therapies or different approaches, but just what's that been like for you from going, face to face with someone in a room to doing it over teletherapy?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first I thought that it was going to be less effective, but I actually find it 20 times more effective, especially with OCD, to
Hmm.
have it telehealth because for many reasons, right? One, I live in North Carolina, but I'm also licensed in New York. Most of my caseload is in New York. I would never be able to treat those individuals. Even a lot of the individuals I treat in North Carolina, I wouldn't have been able to treat because they're 2 hours away, right?
Hmm.
So I think just like having access to specialists that you might not normally have access to, but also having the person in their actual environment. I still have my private practice and I do see some people in person still. And my options of exposures for them is limited, right? I mean, I can still
Hmm.
do it. And
Yeah.
there are pros to being able to have that face-to-face connection. But even my in-person individuals, I still actually have them do telehealth with me sometimes. Like I'll say, no, stay home today. I want you in your
Hmm.
environment, even though they're
Yeah.
5 minutes away from me.
Hmm.
Um, so I think at first it was scary, but now I'm just seeing there's so many benefits to it.
Yeah, I really agree. Yeah, with OCD, it's so much easier to do exposure when they're in the place that's triggering them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, it can be done in person. You might have to bring it contaminated things in or things that trigger you. But yeah, okay. And obviously, no CD haven't asked me to ask this, but I'm just curious. So when you join them, obviously their like onboarding process and training, no doubt would have improved a lot since 2020, right? But just in your experience, what was that like? Onboarding with them and training with them.
Yeah, training was honestly so interesting to me. And I think a lot of it was because of this being a literal way of living that I truly like
Mm.
believed in. And so like even with when we think of like hiring clinicians at NoCD, something we always try to suss out is like, are they on board with kind of like the mentality of this type of
Mm.
therapy, right? Because it is different than like
Yeah.
traditional talk therapy. It's very different. And so my experience was it was good. I was so intrigued. I wanted to learn. I actually listened to the OCD Stories podcast
Cool.
so much to learn. Like I learned so
Nice.
much from your podcast. So that's why I'm like I feel like I'm fangirling that I'm here. But like I learned so much just like listening through podcasts, webinars, Q&As. And so it was just very interesting. It was also
Mm.
scary though, to be honest. Like I think part of the beautiful thing about being an ERP therapist is like, and I'll tell my clients this, like, I'm on that journey with you. Like there are times where I want to tell them, like, it's going to be okay, or like, you're probably fine, or like, you know what, you're crying and like that script that you're doing is really triggering. Like, let's stop. Like, I want to do that all with them. When they're ruminating in session, I want to sit and listen and nod, and I don't want to interrupt and
Mm.
redirect. But it's like, it's hard to go through the training. I do think like it's
Mm.
you're asking therapists to do the exact opposite of what they went to school for, which was to do something to make them feel better, like clients to feel better in the moment, right? We're doing the
Mm.
opposite. Like, let's make your client uncomfortable so we can teach them that they can handle it long term. And that's hard. So the training was very interesting, but it was challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. And the experience you had there of wanting to rescue them and save them, it's exactly what when we're working with younger clients and the parents are going through the same thing, we're telling them not to accommodate. They're experiencing what you experienced there of, but I want to help. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough. So well, actually, but on that, as a parent, would you say that's got easier over time to sit with it and to like not jump in?
Oh, it's totally gotten easier, and it's
Hmm.
an example of exposure. And like
Yeah.
I try to give like moments of transparency with my clients because I want to normalize like that discomfort is inherent in life, whether you have OCD or not. I know that there are extra roadblocks when you have that disorder. I will never minimize that, but to normalize like how like common it is. So obviously it was the exposure, but also it's at this point, I don't want to say it's easy, but in a way it's easy for me because I know it's gonna work, it's gonna help.
Mm.
And so like, and I'll say that too. I'll be like, this is really challenging for me, but I know that this is honestly the most compassionate thing I can do for you is
Mhm.
to actually redirect you from ruminating about the work project that you've been procrastinating because you're trying to make it perfect, and to actually just get the work project out and do it, right?
Mm.
Um, but there are still moments where it's hard because I'm like, oh man, I feel kind of weird having someone do like 30 minutes of our session. They're literally doing their work, right? And I'm like, but we have two options, right? We can either talk about why you're trying to make it perfect, or we can just do it and do it to the best of our ability, right?
Yeah.
So it's not all the way gone. I don't think it'll ever go away because that's never the goal
Hmm.
of any of this. Is none of us will ever successfully get rid of discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's part of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, and on that, with exposures, you kind of alluded to it. Well, on the whole rescuing thing, if we think about that, knowing when to push and when you do need to sort of take a step back as the therapist for the client. Obviously, the client will hopefully communicate that, but sometimes they won't. So, yeah, just anything you want to say on that of when you will think, okay, I can push them harder, I need to push them harder, or when I need to ease off here.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I will always like fall on my own sword, I guess, if you will. Like that's definitely something I work on because I would say my personality is very like, let's go, like I know this is effective, like let's go, let's
Mhm.
do it. Like I'm not throwing them in the water with like an eight, a suds eight or anything like that, but I'm a pusher. I definitely am. And I'll tell clients that.
Mm.
So I think like I have open conversations with my clients almost every session. I'm like, how are things going between us? Like, are we going too fast? Are we going too slow?
Mhm.
Are we doing something that you don't think is helpful? Some of those questions are a little bit tricky because some of those questions might lead to like a compulsion of like, yeah, I don't think that's the right exposure or whatever, but that's like
Mm.
a different conversation. But I think just like communicating with your client, because it's like, I think once you open this space, because it is difficult for them to bring that up. Like no one wants to say like, hey, like I didn't like when you said that or how you said it. Like that's
Mm.
hard. But when you open up the space, you're kind of creating that reparative or corrective experience for them to know it's okay to give feedback.
Yeah.
Um, and I always say, despite what people think about therapists, I am not a mind reader. And so I'm going to need your help.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think just like communicating with them, they'll tell you, like I had someone the other day, he was basically like, I think we did too much, like too many, like we layered, I like to layer my exposure. I think we layered too much. So I was just asking him like, okay, what layer do you feel like that we could have stopped at? And so now with him, I think I do more of like asking him. I
Mm.
don't say. I do think that becomes a slippery slope because then I think sometimes people do get stalled in their progress. But then I think that's where me as a therapist, I have to let go and know that not everyone is going to progress at the way that I want them
Mm.
to. And like, that's okay. Because like this person in particular, they're for sure stalled in their progress because they're not willing. And that's
Hmm.
okay. At
Yeah.
the time, they're not willing to do that. And I think that's like a lesson for us as therapists too, because like we can get really attached to that. And that I think is part of
Mm.
what burns us out. Um,
Yeah.
it's like knowing that everyone's progress is going to look different.
Exactly. And on that, do you think because you had a competitive bodybuilding career or yeah, um, do you think that comes in here? Because I can imagine with that, it's like push yourself, work hard, push through the pain. This is great. Like, does that come in sometimes? And some people are like that, and if some of your clients will be like that, and some of them would be much more like, I need to do this slow at my own pace, much more gently. Like, is that hard for you sometimes? Maybe not hard, but do you notice that getting in the way? That makes sense.
Totally. Like I said, I will follow my own sword. I can push too much. So I actually, a little bit of background with my bodybuilding. Those of you who don't know, like typically when you bodybuild, you like will prep very intensely, like diet for months, and then you'll do a series of shows, usually kind of like back to back. And my last season, I literally wound up quitting, quote unquote, 2 days before my show, which a lot of people be like, why? Like you did all this work, right? I did
Mhm.
one show, I went on stage, I was miserable. I was like a shell of a person, and I made the what I think was the bravest decision. I didn't know it at the time. I felt like a quitter. I was so ashamed of myself,
Mm.
but it was such a hard decision for me to decide not to keep going because like there are times like this last year and a half, I will say my motto has been slowing down is the real flex because I do think
Mm.
I'm someone who's like pushes too hard. And that is not meant to sound like, oh my God, I work out 3 times a day. Like that's not a good skill either.
Mhm.
Like a great way I can describe is I went to run club the other day and the organizer and I were talking. I was like, should I run or walk? And he was like, you should definitely run because I'm usually like at the front with the boys. Like I'm like competitive, right? He's like, you need to run. You need to run. I was like, what if I told you it would actually be harder for me to walk? And he was
Mm.
like, he was like, that was deep. I was like, but it's true, right? Like, so
Mhm.
I think that those are lessons. And I try and I've been better at it. And I again I'll have transparent conversations with my clients, but it's like my goal is yes to overshoot and overcorrect, but like we're never going to get to a point where you never ruminate or you never Google a symptom or you never do this, that, and the fourth, right? So we don't always have to
Mm.
push like, you know, crazy amounts. And I've had a lot of experiences. I don't want to like go too off topic, but it's just like, well, not off topic, but on a tangent about my personal
Mm.
life. But I've had a lot of experiences where uh, the world or the universe or whatever was saying, slow the F down, Medina.
Mhm.
And so I try to practice that with my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Well, that's it. As therapists, we have our own histories and personalities, and we need to manage that, right? And that can be tricky at times. Um, so homework or home practice, which term do you prefer?
Homework.
Homework. Okay. Fair enough.
Although I did what do I think because you're in the UK, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I had a call with a UK member and they kept using the word maddening, and now I feel like I want to use maddening. I'm like, it's maddening, like it makes you
Um,
angry, right?
oh yeah, maddening. Well,
Am I
yeah,
saying it
I would
right?
never use that word. Yeah, but
Oh. So you
that's
use
like,
home practice.
what was that?
Do you use home practice?
Yeah, home practice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
the words that you we use at different parts of the world is interesting.
Yeah, well, maddening is like that's the sort of thing you'd find in what's that show on Netflix?
Bridgerton?
Bridgerton. Yeah, yeah. That I mean, it could be wrong. That feels like much more of a traditional English word. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever used that word. I just say it makes me mad.
Okay, there we
Um,
go.
yeah, but maddening. Yeah, I'm sure some people use it. But yeah, I use home practice only because I work primarily with kids and teens.
Mm.
And that's my own personal history of I hated homework at school. So I always project and think, well, every kid hates homework. That's of course they don't. Some actually like it. But so I just dodge the home. I do use it occasionally, but I use home practice just to not also be associated with school, to be completely separate. But yeah, no issue with
No.
homework. I just that's well, I personally have an issue with homework. I don't have an issue with the word homework.
Got it.
So
Look at that
uh
awareness, that
yeah.
self-awareness.
exactly. You can tell there's a hot issue for me. So, okay, so homework. So when setting homework, obviously it's going to be like flex. It will flex per client, how much, etc. But just anything you want to say on homework and how you do it in a way that they're going to follow through and they're going to get it done.
Yeah, I think communication with your client again is like really important. So whenever I do assign homework, I ask them like, does that sound doable? Is that something you're willing to do? Did I assign too much? Do you need more?
Mm,
And so like that conversation is always helpful. And I always like to remind people that ERP is not extra time in your day necessarily. In fact, it will give you back time in your day more times than
mm,
not. Because I think sometimes what gets in the way of people actually following through is they think they have to like take extra time aside to like write a imaginal script and to practice it, which sometimes it does look like that, right? Like we
mm,
are rewiring things and we're working on a new habit. But sometimes it's as simple as like you're at lunch with your friend and like you're worried that you could stab her and you're like continuing with the conversation anyway. And you're picking up the knife to cut your steak anyway, right? And like that's
mm.
not extra time. That's just a way of living. So I like to remind people that it's something that's integrated into your day. So I try not to be too strict in like what I'm assigning because I do find that just right themes kind of pop up like
Mm.
no matter what the general theme is for people.
Yeah.
They want to do OCD well, and like that's beautiful, but there's also like a better way we can go about that. And so I just say, like, here, I'll usually give like one or two like actual homework pieces. And then the rest, I say, I just want you to implement these concepts as they pop up throughout your day.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that it doesn't feel so much like rigidity with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good way of looking at it. And were your clients that seem to really take to ERP and really hit the ground running? Is there anything you notice about them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's usually the just right themes where
Mm.
they're like, I like it's almost like they want to do exposure in like an urgent way, which again, like I try to find like the balance between I don't want to like be too nitpicky either, because then that's going to be like a whole issue. And that I think that's
Mm.
something I've actually like as of late really been noticing about myself. Because there is like a layer of overcorrection we do as therapists, but like because then I'll see people like ruminating on if they did the exposure right. And then I'm like, is that a product of something that I've created a little bit? So like again, those open conversations. But if people are very like hit the ground running, a lot of times it can be like, I'm trying to get rid of my anxiety. I'm trying to do this right. Um, and that's usually when I open up the conversation of like,
Mm.
what's your goal? And usually they'll say, like, I just like want to get rid of this feeling. It's like, hold up, rewind. Like, let's create a different relationship
Mm.
with our anxiety, our stress. And so yeah, that's what I notice when people want to like get going really quick. There's like that layer of urgency to it.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. And what relationship should we have with our thoughts and our feelings, do you think, around OCD?
Yeah, I think so. Relationship with discomfort, thoughts, feelings. I think it can look in a lot of different ways. So it's hard for me to answer that. I
Okay.
think it's for me less about the relationship and more about like if I were watching you in a movie and like what are you doing? Are you living your life? Because like
Mm.
sometimes when you have discomfort, like you're very aware in the moment of like the importance of it and you like it's okay. Like, I get it. Like, this is happening for a reason. Or sometimes you're like, I freaking hate this. And like your
Mm.
relationship in that moment with discomfort is like, I don't like this, right?
Mm.
Or your view, I guess. But I think
Yeah.
like with the relationship, it's like it's not impacting your physical behaviors. And I would take it a step further. Sometimes it does impact your physical behaviors. And I
Mm.
think that's where, again, like the piece of me as a therapist, I try to be like mindful of. It's like I tell people like the best exposure you can do is to get up and live life despite uncertainty. But sometimes you're going to lay on the couch and ruminate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that's like life.
Mm.
And so I think it's just trying to have the relationship where discomfort and stress impacts your physical behaviors as little as it can, but it's still going to impact you. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question per se, but I don't know. It's like a hard one for me to, I think, like directly answer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I like the movie point because that's all we can really can control is what we do. So if
Hmm.
you were to watch someone, are they living their life, even
Hmm.
if something's going on inside them internally? Okay. And I guess I just want to ask a question to you around how you deal with tough situations. And one tough situation that you were in not too long ago was part of the TV show The Bachelor. Um, and firstly, I guess just to describe what that is, because as far as I'm aware, it pretty much doesn't exist here in the UK. We
Okay.
have Love is Blind and all of that stuff, all the Netflix love shows we have, but we don't have The Bachelor, I don't think. I'm sure that's the same for other countries. It's obviously massive in America, from what I gather. So just what is it? And as you were going through it, how did you manage that? Because I imagine being part of a TV show and an intense one like that would have been psychologically very demanding.
Yeah, it's the show is everyone has a different experience, but it's definitely it was a lot for me. I'll be
Mhm.
transparent on that piece of it. I think one of the biggest things that I noticed like months removed from the situation is how much being a therapist impacted my
Mm.
experience for so many reasons. But one of the biggest things I noticed, and it's not just me being a therapist, I'm a therapist, I'm a brown woman, and my dad's from Bangladesh. So it's like I have a lot of boxes that I feel like I've been placed into and like
Mm.
expectations that have been placed on me. And I think just people in the helping profession. So like when I went on the show, I think I really held back a lot of like who I truly was because I didn't want to be perceived as like maybe someone who gets angry or someone who's too upset or like I was scared to cry. And it was like these things that were very vulnerable for me to not only in general show, right? And no one wants to show
Mhm.
that, but especially as someone who is always the person who's listening to the people cry, listening to the people be
Mm.
vulnerable. And I think something I really like wanted to promise myself when I went on the show was I was going to show those parts of me because like I think that's important for our clients to see.
Mm.
And then the irony of it is like you do like so many like so much of like maybe like the internet like bullying or comments that you get is like, oh my
Yeah.
god, you're a therapist and you did this and you're a therapist, and it's like, yes,
Yeah.
I am a human. So yeah,
Yeah.
I did do that, and I'm not perfect, and I'm not going to use the perfect words. And so I think like that experience, like despite what people think about reality shows, like I learned so much about myself, and I'm continuing to learn like nuggets of things about myself. I actually started writing a book a little bit about it. TBA or TBD, I don't know, coming soon.
Yeah.
Something like that. But I think like you learn that like you learn how
Mm.
you are. Like I felt like I had to kind of be this poised, calm, cool, collected person.
Mm.
Um, and I think like that's again another reason why therapists feel burnt out. Like we have to like a lot of times we're placed or expected to be kind of like these poised individuals. And um I think it's just like good for therapists to like admit that we're not,
Yeah.
and that's okay. So it's a very I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't want to like go in too many directions, but it was a
Mm.
very interesting experience.
Yeah, I bet. And also I think it's for everyone else to see that therapists are human and they get mad, they cry, they do all of this and that's okay. I think I've seen it on Instagram as well, even with me of as if I'm not allowed to have emotion, or be
Mhm.
angry. And it's like, well, I'm a human, I am a therapist too, and I try to treat people with respect, but we're human. Um, so where am I going with that? Yeah, I guess as you were going through it, it's the last question on it, but as you were going through it, um, thinking of ERP and maybe other therapy tools, were you sort of using that or thinking of that or seeing it through that lens?
I know this sounds corny, but like I do truly like the constructs of ERP, the construct or the idea of like
Mm.
importance and discomfort and uncertainty, the importance of not needing to fix something. Like that is truly how I live life. And so it for sure, I don't think it was something I was like purposefully conjuring up, but like, there were moments where like clearly there was an attempt to provoke emotion
Mm.
and I do stand by how I reacted in a lot of situations, which was no reaction, which was, not good for reality TV. But at the end of the day, like I'm at a place in my life where like I don't need to like necessarily convince someone of like my viewpoint. My ego is not big enough for me to like need you to see my side. I'm a
Mm.
firm believer that people are who they are. Like I think of like just relationships, whether they be like, romantic or platonic family relationships, like people are who they are, like believe them. I'm not saying there's no molding, but like I think like when you're in a house full of girls, it's like there's gonna be people that like view life differently, are different than you, and like that's okay. And I think that
Mm.
totally relates to anxiety because how many times are we trying to like change a situation or change a person or um, make sure a person likes us or like all that stuff. So I think like those constructs for sure came into mind because I'm like in my real life, like if I don't really care for a friend, for example, like I'll just like communicate with them less. I don't need to tell them
Mm.
like, hey, I don't like that you did this, and this. Maybe if I've been friends with them for like 7 years, yeah. But
Mm.
like girls I've known for 5 days, no. So I think like a lot of therapy or just ways of living did show up
Mm.
a lot while we were filming.
Good, good. Well, you survived it. That's
I did. I did.
yeah.
I was like the therapist in me was like, this is so bad. I need more sleep. I need more
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah, I bet. And thinking of your own mental health and well-being, what do you do that kind of keeps you on track in kind of a healthy state of mind, whatever that is?
Yeah, I think so. I have been taking up dance.
Hmm.
I wanted to dance when I was younger, and my family couldn't afford it. So I did like a lot of sports, but the reason, and this is why I did bodybuilding, I would say my confidence is pretty low. I think I get that I come off very confident. I think people
Hmm.
assume I'm confident. I totally understand why they assume that. But I would say I'm a pretty self-conscious person. And I also like to take a moment to define self-conscious. I think we have like a very negative connotation about what that means. Self-conscious means you're conscious of yourself, which is
Hmm.
you hear this all the time. I want to be aware. I want to be self-aware, right? And you as a therapist, you probably, I'm guessing,
Hmm.
maybe relate to this as well. Like that's so much of schooling is becoming aware of yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so when I say I'm self-conscious, I don't necessarily mean it wholly in like a negative way. I do think there are moments where it like overflows and I'm probably a little too self-conscious. But I think something I like to do to like keep myself like mentally um well, I guess, is to do things that maybe I'm not necessarily good at, but are just for fun. So I think I
Hmm.
take things like very seriously, which is a great trait I have. And not everything has to be that serious. And so when I go to dance, I still try, but it's like the one thing that I'm like, you know what? I just want to do it for fun. It doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe the teacher's
Hmm.
instructing to move this way. Like I remember distinctly not too long ago, I was in a class, I was facing the wrong direction for a solid 30 minutes, but I was having fun until
Hmm.
I realized I was facing the wrong direction. Then I was so embarrassed. But then I was like, Medina, you were just having fun for 30 seconds. And like it's so I think just like doing things and a lot of people with anxiety, they have like these perfectionistic tendencies. So hopefully they can relate to this. It's like do things that maybe are just for fun and that like don't need to be perfect and like maybe purposefully like do the move wrong or do something wrong and like show yourself like that's how you build confidence is by like showing up even if it's not perfect. So that's something I like continue to try to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And are you still doing yoga, lifting weights, stuff like that?
Yeah, I still work out. I work out a lot less. I don't want to like go off on like too much of a tangent, but like last year I had like a really bad condition where I was actually in the hospital because I worked out too
Mhm.
hard.
Oh, wow.
So that's been another reason I have had this motto of slowing down. So I still work out, but I work out a lot less. Just because yeah, that was like a very like alarming thing that happened where it's
Mm.
like, you should
Yeah.
probably slow down. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I'm glad you're better.
Yeah.
And making different choices.
Yeah.
Um, so if you could pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old you, what would you tell her?
Oh, um, pick up the phone, call the 20-year-old me. I would tell her, and I'd probably still tell the 31-year-old her, it's not that serious.
Mm.
Uh, I think we can take things really seriously. I tell my clients this. I tell myself this all the time. Um, It's not that serious.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah. And actually, just I'm curious. I think I know where you're going, but just if you could expand on why it's not that serious. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think most things, like when we look back at it, it's like not that big of a deal. And it's not in like a minimizing way.
No,
Like
yeah.
I think we still want to like validate that things can feel rough in the moment, but like that's
Mm,
what it is. It's rough in the moment. And then you look back and you're like, oh, like even when I was getting
mm,
dragged on the internet, I just made a video this morning about this. I haven't posted it yet, but it's like in that moment it sucked so bad and I regretted saying something, and like now I'm like I don't regret it because like that was part of like my journey. I learned from it.
mm,
It was something that was challenging in the moment, and like now it's like made me into like a little bit of a different person. And I know that sounds like cliche, but it's like it can be serious in the moment, but in the grand scheme of things it doesn't have to be
mm.
serious.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but it's like sometimes when it's like we develop ways of being based on like protective mechanisms that our brain beautifully has, right? Like,
Mm,
but the way we apply it is ineffective, right? Like if you maybe grew up in an environment where everything had to be perfect, it's like that's beautiful that your mind developed that way. And like the clothes in your closet don't need to be perfectly aligned. That's not serious. But the fact that you're a surgeon, yeah, like let's
mm,
use those perfectionistic tenets because it is important and it is vital in that. So it's like also finding like the areas where it is serious and applying it. But then like
mm.
I go to dance class, it's not that serious. But yeah, when I'm
Yeah.
working with a client who's been struggling with OCD and hasn't had any luck with any therapist, like I'm going to take that seriously.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean.
No, yeah, I like that. But there's also even in OCD, there's something about trying not to take it seriously because then you're not buying into the thoughts as much. You're starting to see them as just thoughts. And yeah. Okay. So you got a billboard in North Carolina. What do you want written on that billboard?
Um, dang, these are some hard-hitting questions. Oh Lord. Nothing lasts forever.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Or contentment.
Okay.
I think we have a negative connotation of contentment as well. So
Yeah. Okay.
uh, I think you can
Maybe.
still want to progress
Yeah.
and be content at the same time. I think a lot of times we think those are two opposite
Mm.
things.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can be somewhat at peace and happy and still strive for more.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Or like we can, like I think when we think of self-compassion, people think they're just gonna like sit on the couch and eat ice cream and like let themselves off the hook with everything. It's like you can still hold yourself accountable and be encouraging,
Yeah.
which is
True.
really important with therapy, right? Like that how much self-denigration stalls people's progress.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. And often I think when people think with compassion, well, if I'm compassionate to myself, then I won't try hard. But that's not what compassion is. It's not letting yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
It's supporting yourself and holding yourself to account, but doing it in a kinder, caring way.
Yeah.
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 Do you know of Kristen Neff? Have
Yeah, I
you?
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never
Okay. So,
interviewed her, but
oh. But I'm sure you're familiar with her like research that like being like hard on yourself actually puts you in the worst mindset
mm,
to make change. And I always like to remind people of that because like, and that's the number one when they research, that's the number one reason we are hard on ourselves is we think that it'll help us change, but it's the exact opposite.
yeah,
Um,
that's it. Yeah, athletes really struggle with this. And maybe you did, right, when you were competitively lifting. I don't know, is that fair to say or not?
self-compassion. I struggle with
No, no.
that still. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
okay. Yeah.
Is that not what you were talking about? Now I just like unearthed my
No, no,
my
that is pretty much what I was talking about. It's more just people who do things competitively, they can be, they're so hard on themselves. Yeah. And whenever I bring up self-compassion with those people, they're often like, that's what, but if I do that, I'm not going to progress. I'm going to not be anything. That's just not the case. But it's hard to shift that sometimes.
yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
a hard balance because it's like how do you hold
Mm,
yourself accountable and push? And it's
yeah.
like
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that I know the answer to that. But like I think of like if
Mm,
someone doesn't do their homework, like what's getting in the way? Like I know that you're here to get better and like how can we
mm,
make sure that we get it done
Yeah.
still, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's just always an and
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
whatever the
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So lastly, anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
oh gosh. I don't know. I think something I've been really passionate about, and we touched on it
Mm.
briefly, was just like this idea of like anyone in the helping profession. I think like we really need to open more conversations about what it's like to be a therapist and the mental toll it takes. And I say this with so much love and appreciation for what I do and like the work that it takes. I mean, you're in the field
Mm.
as well. And so just like any therapists that are listening, making sure that you're setting the boundaries, simple things like, no, you're not working at 7 p.m. unless that's what you want to do, right? Or
Yeah.
like, ending the session, at the 55-minute mark instead of the 60, so you can have a second to just debrief and these are really important things for clients to hear. Like I tell my clients, I'm like, if I'm running a few minutes behind, honestly, I might just be closing up like mentally from the last session, or maybe I haven't ran to the bathroom. And like, I so appreciate your patience in waiting. And they appreciate that. Because then again, they see that like human part of us and, us just being open about like, and I'm not saying like disclose, I actually really don't disclose that much to my clients.
Mm.
But like just normalizing like the experience that you're bringing them along with on like any therapy journey. It doesn't have to just be ERP, just like how uncomfortable it is. And so, yeah, like I said, I just think like, I wish like as an earlier therapist, I heard those things. Just, it's okay if you can't do 6 hours of therapy a day and you're kind of spent at 2, or whatever, right? Like it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point. It can be a very hard career at times, extremely rewarding as well,
Yeah.
but very hard. And that goes for any of the caring professions, right? Yeah, you really got to look after yourself. But equally, if we can't look after ourselves, what message is that sending our clients,
Yeah. Yeah. I know I just said this and it came to, I have like weird thoughts throughout the day. But I was just like, I don't know who needs to hear this, but you need you more than your client needs you. It's kind of like almost like and I don't mean like now we're just in exchange, we're going to like ditch all the clients to the side, but like, I think it's a reminder because how many times are therapists or people in the caregiving profession, like putting aside their own needs to take care of another person, which is beautiful. And we have to take a step back because you can't possibly, we all know this, right? It's so cliche, but like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yeah.
And so the gift to your client is being there for you as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, your client will get more out of you if you're full in a good way. And speaking of cliches, it reminds me of what they say on airplanes: put your oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're starved of oxygen, you can't really help anyone else. So, look, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me and sharing. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Like I said, has been is like not serendipitous. What's the word? It's like surreal. It's surreal. That's the word. So I appreciate you having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NOCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NOCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.